Hi everybody and welcome to the next episode of the Biodiversity Podcast by Teasels. And today, as you can probably see and probably hear, we are outside and we're meeting the guys from Wild City Studio. All right, gents, how are we?
Good. Yeah, good to meet you. Welcome to our humble abode.
I know, I feel honoured to be here.
Gritty and industrial.
That's the way we like it. Lads, so can you just give us, before we get into the meat and drink of this podcast, just want to give us a bit of a background on yourselves and basically how you came to be Wild City Studio, basically, how we come here today.
How long have you got, Dan? How long have you got?
I don't know.
Yeah, this is the short form of it. So
Yeah.
I'm Jon Davies, and this is Steve, and we're Wild City Studios. We're urban landscape designers who focus on nature and community connections in the city. The backstory of it all, I guess, is that I've been a gardener for 15 plus years now. I now have a very cool company called Golden Wild, which is a community of gardeners who are about conscious creativity and looking at trying to garden in a more innovative, cooler way. Met Steve at Hampton Court Palace in 2017 when I did a garden down there, which was an urban food forest, which was really fun. Steve was working on another garden, and we instantly connected. The bromance began, and
I was going to say, that sounds really romantic.
It was beautiful. Our eyes met, and it's been, what's that, 5 years plus?
Maybe 6 years.
Six years of journeying.
I think it was like that kind of moment where like we didn't really maybe connect with that many people who were kind of go to these shows, certainly not the audience.
Yeah.
So it's like,
and maybe some of the designers as well.
a little bit of glimmer in the eye, like, oh, here's one of me. And then, I think John said, like, oh, maybe we could do some stuff together in the future. And like, I thought, yeah, cool. And then you think nothing of it. And then, we started chatting a bit more, did a few projects together. So my background's in, like, I guess my beginnings was in art, photographic art, where I spent a lot of time, like, probably a misspent youth in abandoned spaces, neglected spaces, and eventually I started...
That sounds like an excellent youth. As well.
yeah, maybe not misspent now.
It's the correct youth.
I spent a lot of time, eventually I saw the beauty in these spots and I was photographing them, and I started then creating artwork about that and questioning humanity's place in the natural world, and are we natural? Is the urban landscape natural? That was a lot of what my artwork was about, focusing on these abandoned spots. I eventually sort of got out of the art world. It wasn't really for me, and these sort of ideas I thought maybe a little bit bigger than just hanging a picture on a wall. Like I felt like I wanted to do something a little bit more hands-on. Then sort of drifted through my 20s doing all sorts of different things. Eventually, in my late 20s, 28, I was cutting my grandmother's hedge one day, and so somebody walked down the road and said, "You do this professionally?" And I didn't at the time. I was unemployed at the time. I just said yes, and eventually I was doing everyone's hedge, everyone's lawn.
Nice, yeah.
And then I thought I probably need to know a bit, if I'm going to call myself a gardener, I need to know a bit about plants. So I then went into horticulture, retrained in horticulture, and that sort of like caught me, I guess, and like I loved it, and it sort of opened up the whole industry of like landscaping, design. I instantly connected my creative background with that sort of design, and I loved sort of building stuff, so it seemed like a perfect fit. I was outside, being physical all day, it was cool.
Yeah.
Then I moved to Bristol, then I focused on garden design specifically, and that was my kind of epiphany moment, and it paired with meeting John, where I saw a lot of other designers looking at the wild for inspiration. And I was always thinking when I was learning horticulture, like I don't really connect with this kind of planting, these blousy plants and pretty sort of colour combinations, and I thought, why can't I create this wild spot or this forest in a garden? And I couldn't really get the answer to that. And I guess that's been the journey that kind of we've been on together of like, how do you get that more authentic wildness?
And
then, being really inspired by loads of pioneering plantsmen who are around at the moment.
It's funny as well, because that thing of starting as a gardener rather than like as a garden designer, we both had that. Obviously the Golden Wild crew are about that as well, and I think there's a slight difference in that, where you've come from and that kind of like real roots level. Of, starting off doing really crap stuff. You know what I mean? And grinding through.
Yeah, but I think that's every... How can I put this? I think it's a more meaningful journey because you can start up here and you can do a 7-week garden design course online.
Yeah.
And there's just no connection to your product, the stuff that you are using.
Yeah.
So
But there's instinctual things you learn along the way in that way as well, right? You know what I mean?
You're observing.
You're observing in a different way, unconsciously.
Yes.
You feel it. You feel it. Do you know what I mean? So you've had other people that have been super trained and they come in on a certain level. They haven't got that instinctual feeling, and that's what's cool as well. That designers come to work with us now, like to get that experience on the ground, and you can really tell the difference between the ones who really take that seriously and really connect with that, and really get that that's very important. It's funny because we're just talking on that level. So after doing Hampton Court show and Best Garden for a Changing World, gold medal on TV, all of that kind of like show business.
Was that the one where you were with the hairy bikers?
Hairy bikers, they cooked some food and we had and
you
then
look like twins in that shot.
Yeah,
sorry.
Yeah, hey, he's a very handsome man. And then coming back to like normal work after that, and then being back out like weeding some old granny's driveway and being like, what's happened? Like, why have I not blown up? You know what I mean? And so that was quite an interesting journey. But I think as well, it keeps you super humble, and things take time to be done well. You know what I mean? So rather than an overnight sensation, you know what I mean? It's even from that point there, at Hampton Court, like it's taken us this amount of time to get to where we are right now.
Yeah, but how many garden designers do you see have gone through the Chelsea thing and they win Best in Show and they're the best thing since sliced bread, and at the end of the day, you guys are. Well, we all are. We're running day-to-day businesses, aren't we? We're sort of. You've got to. That's still got to continue, hasn't it?
And it's a bigger thing, is it? It's a bigger picture thing as well for us. Is that we're trying to do something not just about that garden on the telly or this and that. This is a movement that's about everybody coming together who's on a similar page. And I think that's what we were saying at the beginning as well. Is when we met each other at that Hampton thing, it was like eyes looking across and being like, oh, he's like me. And there was hardly anyone else like that. And I had like a band of like rough diamonds working with me at the time who didn't really get the vibe. And we were kind of, we were just in this whole thing of food forestry and permaculture being cool. And now over this period of time, we're just getting connected with more and more people who are on the same wavelength.
And I think it's that accessibility you're touching on, like the designers. You see a lot of designers, Chelsea, and I think it just goes with the territory that they seem almost untouchable a little bit. And I think it's a blessing and a curse really that we've come from kind of the grassroots level, because I do anyway, like get bogged down in like what's going to work, what isn't, and like I think some designers seem a lot more free because they're just like, I'm going to do this amazing design and not really think about some of the nuts and bolts. But I think that the relatability, I think that's maybe what we're really passionate about, is about chatting to people on a level and just and making it really. That's what I love about like John Little is great because he's just really personable. He's really open, and I think that's
super genuine.
Yeah, just a genuine kind of look at what I'm doing, and it feels tangible. It's not like something that I don't know how they've done that or what's the reality behind that. What's not worked, what has worked.
And that's the thing that needs to get needs to be more in the conversation about this real openness about trial and error.
Exactly.
Like we did this. It fell on its arse, but we looked back and we saw that. It was John was saying how he tried. Where was it? The Wildlife Trust Garden just down the road from his from Hildrop.
Is that the car park?
Yeah, and how he put some substrate straight on the hogging, and then basically it wicked up all the water, which meant all the Mediterranean plants died. And he's like, not going to do that again, are we?
Yeah.
And that's that connectivity, that authenticity, and
but it's also being kind of willing to give things a go, like that. Yeah. And just being quite ballsy about it with an open heart and being like, I'm just trying this stuff. You know what I mean? I don't have all the answers, but I'm going for it. And that's why I love what John Little's done. Like in his own place, is just experimented very freely, very openly, very passionately, and come up with something quite incredible.
And artistically, it moves in my opinion, I want to hear what you guys think, it moves the creative process on a lot quicker because,
when it's taking, isn't it?
But this is the thing, when you're talking, you know, literally when you were talking about Chelsea, my head was just like, yeah, I can just see the frothy cow parsley. I can see the irises. You know, you can just same old stuff. And
Shit, we've got a lot of cow parsley in our
I
garden.
bet you have. Well, you need to,
Banking on that.
you need to have a game.
Take the cow parsley out.
I lost my train of thought now, John. Thanks
Yeah,
for that,
just
mate.
Chelsea, the standard stuff you see.
Yeah, and I mean, what do you think? Because to me, this is the next iteration of the fluffy Pieter Aldorf.
Yeah,
You know, if I'm saying that right.
Yeah, no, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it feels. I mean, we're very lucky. I think that Project Giving Back. A big shout out to them as well. They're the sponsors that are creating a lot of gardens at Chelsea, which I think would not be there unless they were able to sponsor them.
Yeah.
And I think at the moment, that's a massive
John,
change.
before we go any further, do you just want to give before we go back to your specific garden, do you want to give a bit of a background on Project Giving Back? Because I'm sure, I'm sure some people are watching this know all about it. They probably follow what you guys are doing. Yeah. But just give us a bit of background on the Project Giving Back.
So Project Giving Back are our sponsors at Chelsea, and they I think they're sponsoring 40 gardens, and they're philanthropists. I don't think we know who the actual.
I don't know.
So, unnamed philanthropists.
The Illuminati, is it?
And so they're you go through a certain process. It's a little bit like X Factor, isn't it? And you have to go through these kind of stages and present in a certain way. But you get the opportunity to do some really cool things. And the garden we've been trying to design, we've been working on for trying to get it for a good few years. Yeah,
it was like last 6 years, and we were accepted twice by the RHS with this very similar design, very similar ideas, perhaps not as evolved, but we just couldn't get the funding.
Yeah. And so to be in this kind of opportunity where they are able to fund and to fund other gardens and to fund other charities, so you have to be with a charity, which is
separate charity,
and it's all about the platform for the charity fundamentally. Although us big egos jump on that and take as much advantage as we can, So they're doing amazing things. They've been doing it. They started last year, didn't they? And they're doing this year, and they're doing next year, and potentially it's going to be a little bit more as well. I think they're really freshening up Chelsea, because the standard sponsors of M&G and investment bankers and B&Q and people like that, you're going to get a certain kind of grade of garden being designed for that kind of sponsor.
So I've just gone to sleep as you were saying that. I find that kind of pretty boring.
Exactly.
What's the champagne company like?
Lord Perrier. So being about the charity and being about really creative gardens has given a lot of opportunity to some really cool designs, and we've seen some of the designs that are at Chelsea this year, and they are cool, and they are different. And like you're saying, there's definitely a big difference between the kind of the people's choice, let's say, of some of the things you see at Chelsea compared to some of the stuff that's now going on at Chelsea. And it's an interesting conversation we have, isn't it, about what the people want at Chelsea compared to what the designers or maybe the other wavelength want to see at Chelsea. The people on the ground at Chelsea who come to Chelsea might not necessarily want to see the kind of thing we're doing. You know, I mean, the People's Choice last year was the most traditional of all of the gardens.
But people don't know what they don't know. Like people will say, "Oh, bloody rubble! What's this?" But if you were to say, well, rubble's great for X, Y, and Z reasons, then it's like,
I think that's what's important. Like, I think that's what I've always seen a show garden opportunity as being about, challenging the status quo, not breaking the mould. That's not what it's all about. And a lot of people who go to these shows want to see more of your traditional garden. And I think I was always taught that Chelsea's more like the high-end catwalk, and you get the trickle down eventually. What's really cool about Project Giving Back is, we chat about this all the time, but when we went on this journey to begin with, we had this idea, seed of this idea, and we thought, probably our egos flaring as well, that we're going to be quite punk about it. We're going to break the mould, we're going to shake up the system, but we couldn't get the funding, so we couldn't get there. But it's
Project Giving Back are our sponsors at Chelsea, and they I think they're sponsoring 40 gardens. And they're philanthropists. I don't think we know who the actual.
I don't know.
So unnamed philanthropist.
The Illuminati, is it?
Yeah. And so they're you go through a certain process. It's a little bit like X Factor, isn't it? And you have to go through these kind of stages and present in a certain way. But yeah, you get the opportunity to do some really cool things. And the garden we've been trying to design, we've been working on for like trying to get it for a good few years. Yeah,
it was like last 6 years, and we were accepted twice by the RHS with this very similar design, very similar ideas, perhaps not as evolved, but we just couldn't get the funding.
Yeah. And so to be in this kind of opportunity where they are able to fund and to fund other gardens and to fund other charities, so you have to be with a charity,
nice.
Which is
separate charity,
and it's all about the platform for the charity fundamentally. Although us big egos jump on that and take as much advantage as we can, so
it's interesting now that like we've been on this journey, and obviously a lot of people have been as well. So we're only maybe one of three, if not more, that are celebrating this idea of growing in. Or celebrating the idea of disused spaces, waste, growing things out of this really harsh substrates to create really resilient schemes. So we're part of this movement now, which is really exciting, I think, and Project Giving Back's probably given people the platform for that.
I think it's that kind of, I always like to relate things to the music industry because I kind of feel that in that way. But it feels...
Sorry, do you like music, John? I don't know. I haven't seen that. I thought
a little bit of Bob, one or two, but it's that kind of feeling, right? So you've got like, as an analogy of that kind of like John Little scene of being this kind of like punky thing that's going on and a growing kind of surrounded about that. I think the same with the permaculture industry, these little movements are happening, and then Chelsea's the mainstream, and then we're able to kind of like highlight that little kind of section into the mainstream so that it becomes the norm as much, or like filters down, like you say, the hierarchy.
But it was only 3 years ago when you had the first Beth Chatto Symposium.
Yeah.
And then last year, John got up and said, well, I'm no longer the Novelty Act.
Yeah.
So how quickly it's standard, isn't it? How quickly the Novelty Act or the stuff on the periphery comes into the mainstream.
My little stories were at Hampton when we were doing it. We did the urban food forestry, and that was 2017. So it was kind of like back in a different kind of world then. And we had some kind of strange kind of peerings in by the standard, and one lady shouted out, "This is weird," and I was like, "Yes, that is the one." So it's going to be interesting to see now
this is weird.
at the show this year, because there's Tom Massey's doing some quite similar kind of stuff, isn't he? Cleve West doing some similar things. I think Harris Bugg are kind of going down that route as well, and it's going to be interesting now that it's kind of almost across the board to see that kind of reaction.
And also different approaches to it. So it's like John Little's got his look in his garden, but then it's how do you manipulate these into different situations? It's not just one look. That's also interesting about the naturalistic planting movement. It's like, well, in the beginning it was like, well, it all looks the same, but then if people start mixing it up, doing different methods of doing it. So that's quite exciting. It's like, what are different people's interpretations?
And that takes it one step further, doesn't it? That it's kind of like, if we've got these big challenges of how to create naturalistic, different versions of immersive naturalistic future, like in the urban, it's not just one way of doing it. It's not just our way of doing it. It's not just John Little's way of doing it. It's not Nigel Dunnett's way of doing it, or any of the bigger guys. You know what I mean? There's different versions for different reasons across the city, because the city is very diverse and different contexts all the way through.
Yes.
So that's what's cool as well. It's about creating that community where everybody's kind of got the similar kind of idea, but we all do it in our own way, and again, that's pretty cool, isn't it?
I know, because I know it's sort of nuts and bolts, but I often think that. I've been working with some clients recently, and we took them down to see John's place, and they loved it. But they were like, "Yeah, we love it, but we don't want loads of rubble outside the front door." And I was like, "Yes, you do, because it would be brilliant." But it's like, so I often think that the kind of what I want to play around with is have all the rubble, have all the sand underneath, but then have that site-specific.
Yeah.
Say for it like Cambridge.
Yeah.
So Cambridge has like the Cambridge white brick from the Cambridge clay. So you could sort of grind that up on site and have that as a sort of site-specific. Yeah. I don't want to use it as a mulch, but like a covering. Just to make it.
Yeah. Definitely.
Semi-relevant to the surroundings.
Yeah, exactly. It's the same, you see those kind of places like Coal Drops, the development down there, and different places like that, where done it, and different people have done it in a different way, and use the same kind of principles in a way, but just it's all to context, isn't it?
The fundamental of low nutrient substrates. I guess that's the movement. And I guess.
So is it so it is the movement, but I guess it's not losing sight of. We talk about biodiversity, but we also need to be thinking about like resource use.
Yeah.
Like we need to keep on recycling this closed loop of, what we're actually doing here. We're not, to lose. I mean, I'm saying that to myself, not to lose sight of.
Big time, and that's been something we've been lucky enough to journey with, isn't it? On some of the projects we're working on.
Has Alexis got something to say about recycling?
He may well do. We'll get him in. He can do like a finish of the whole thing, just to, hi guys, just to remind you all to separate your waste.
But that's the next step on, isn't it? It's like, okay, it's low nutrient. That's what we're getting from looking at these motorway verges or brownfields. It's like, there's the low nutrients. Then it's another step of like, well, actually, won't just use the same stuff there, the waste. So like that's the next stage on. But it's not like it's not new. It's like basically a gravel garden. That's not a new idea.
Yeah, it's Beth Chatter's gravel garden.
I mean, I've had like about 3 or 4 podcasts where we just say, so wasn't Beth Chatter doing this about 40 years ago? Just because she,
that's the thing, it plants for place, isn't it?
Yeah.
But what's kind of the other thing of the low nutrients, and this was like the epiphany moment for me when I see John and Fee. Because Fee obviously takes care of all the veg and stuff, right?
Yeah.
And I love food forestry, and I love the kind of permaculture, and that obviously needs good soil. So it's the complete opposite to that. But they were saying how they strip the soil, the topsoil, and that goes to food production. So again, it's all on site. That really works well for our kind of connection again, because it's more like the balance of low nutrients, strip the soil, contours and topography of the soil at the back, which I love as well. Food forestry there.
And it's this and. This kind of words getting into the vernacular, just thinking about topography, thinking about north, south, moisture retention, stress, all
Hugel
this
culture,
stuff.
you know what I mean? That's a fun
So
thing.
what?
Hugel culture. So that was what we did with the Hampton Garden, but it's old school techniques, but that's a very big permaculture thing. So it's you basically like layer up logs and green waste in a certain way, and then you put the soil over the top, and it creates like a kind of internal irrigation system almost. And also amazing habitat layers underneath. But
so basically we're going back to what people have been doing for thousands of years.
Again, not new ideas.
No, taking ourselves,
but it's putting into like a modern context and putting that. And again, it's putting everyone's own signature on it, isn't it?
And it's that it's the branding. So like when we first met, this was our kind of collision of like. John introduced me to permaculture, food forestry, edibles. I was very interested in the observation of these wilder spots in the city, the beauty in the banal, I suppose, and then we've come together on that, and then seen all of these other people doing this stuff, and we could see the direct correlation of this, because they don't really, as John was just saying, they don't really necessarily meet, but we've seen how these two things can meet together. But what I found interesting about what John introduced me to, all the branding of that, and even like eco stuff, and the whole branding of it it's very fringe, almost hippie-ish. It doesn't. I mean, it's been going around
70s at least, and it was that movement.
Well, like I think it was almost that group of people kind of almost like it to be fringe in a way. I think it's their thing, but I think the whole thing is we need to make all this mainstream. I guess those things like Chelsea Flower Show, making this all legitimate.
Yeah.
And we're really about like modernising that, updating the branding of it, so it's just cool and engaging.
And then I think so. As you're talking, you think about the branding, you think about what Wild Farmed are doing, and again, that's on a larger agricultural scale. Yeah. But again, obviously with Andy Cato's background and his media background, how they're not making soil health sexy, but it's just bringing it to the fore, isn't it?
Yeah, and this is the
messaging
kind of thing
as well, isn't it?
Exactly, it's a messaging, and that's the thing. The urban environment, as we kind of like shout about, in terms of, it can definitely be greener, but it's actually not too bad a place in terms of like the wildness that is here.
Yeah.
But we say it's a kind of. I think one of the old permaculture legends said it at one point, how smaller gardens or in the urban space is almost like a playground of ideas.
Yes.
So you can experiment with these ideas in the urban, and then it ripples out into the culture. You know what I mean? And that idea of really and truly, it's the rural areas that really need that's where the serious messages need to be had.
Yeah.
It's almost like our little part to play in it. all of our little parts play in it in the urban is to kind of create that mentality, so that then it can ripple out to the agricultural world and all of that side of it, you know?
I think it's this idea we sort of talk about a bit at the moment, play with this. If we see ourselves as natural, which we are, which I think quite a lot of people see this divide of human and nature, and it's just
which is just mental,
nonsense.
isn't it?
But if we see ourselves as part of it, then the city is, you know, some of the wildest places there are. If you include things like music, culture, the heritage of the city, and I think there's a lot of this idea of
however uncomfortable that is for certain people, and the diversity in that in all its forms, it may be uncomfortable. But yeah,
well, people like want to go back or green everything up, and you can't do that. Things exist, but I think there's a beauty and an opportunity in the urban to create these platforms and a forum where you can have these really great experience, nature-centered experience, if we realign with it, which then, as John's saying, starts getting people to think about what it is. That's what a city should be, I think, a melting pot of people discussing ideas, which then they start rippling out on a much bigger scale.
I've always had this thing of like the idea of like people control things because they don't know about it. It comes from a place of fear, you know what I mean? So without that knowledge of how ecology works and planting communities and things like that, people control and create static environments. And that's like, you see that, you know, with a lot of our clients at Golden Wild across the board, like we've had to change that mentality even in the domestic business, right? How places are kind of static and clean and held. But if you know how to understand ecology and urban ecology, and there's such resilience across wild plants, you know, weeds, working with that rather than holding it down.
Because the problem is, I often think now, like working with clients, is you're not actually, how can I put this? You're not actually buying a garden in a way. You're buying into a process. Like, you know, there you go. There's a load of money. There's the garden. We'll just keep it still for the next 20 years. So, you know, we've got our product. But it's more like no. You're buying into process. What you're buying on day one, what comes off in the seed packet or on the back of a wholesale plant, you know.
Exactly.
Plant.
Exactly.
It's going to be like that in 5 years.
Exactly. And that boils down to the truth of it all, which we've kind of spoken about a lot, is it's all about the maintenance and the aftercare to whatever we do.
Yeah.
And that's the design process. It has to be about how is this going to get looked after.
Yeah.
And it's fundamentally the thing that's most missed. And, you know, it's starting to change, you know, but we have to design to how it's going to be looked after. And there's so many different ways that can be. And again, that boils down to the kind of context of the site, context of the budget. You know, Can I ask? And I'm sorry if people who listen to all these podcasts ask the same question every single podcast. But when you're talking with clients, do you say, okay, how much money have you got to spend on the maintenance? Don't give a monkeys about, you can give me 50 grand for the garden. How much once everybody's cleared off and the last brick's been laid? Are you forward and say, look, how much money have you got to spend on the maintenance? Yeah, I mean, we have different processes, don't we? Mine's more design and build, and we also have the maintenance team that come in after, and I just have that conversation, and I can kind of work out almost from the process and where they live. I'm quite lucky because on that side of business, it's quite affluent, you know what I mean? It runs from East London kind of trendies to Hampstead and Islington. Yeah. So there's a certain kind of grade that I know they're going to be able to work with, and so certain things are done in a certain way to meet that need. But you know what we're passionate about with Wild City Studio is the public side of it, and what we're doing with Centre for Mental Health is this whole idea of nature should be accessible to everybody, and it's to places like Tottenham where we are now, where the council haven't got the budgets to meet these kind of needs. Yeah. So how do you do it affordably? Yeah. How do you create a maintenance system that works within that level? And for me, actually, I'm really kind of getting kicks from the design side of it. I really enjoy, but I'm more of kind of, I look at something and see it, where Steve's like really cool at the you know, getting the details down on the designs. Yeah. I see the overall picture and then we work together on that. But what really I'm excited about is designing those kind of processes. So it's designing the aftercare of a community volunteer group and a support network for that on a large scale kind of innovative scheme. Working with the different kind of stakeholders or the friends of groups and things like that. That for me is very interesting, to listen to all the voices and to see how this plays out long term. And there's a few things we're engaged with at the moment, which are you've got so many people's opinions and so many people who want in, and how is it going to be done right for everybody to like it? But then also, how's it going to be there in 5 years' time? How's it going to be there in 10 years' time? What's it going to look like? The succession of that place, especially when you're working with this wildness.
Yeah, it's these new ideas that's the biggest challenge. I have a different experience to John in my personal practice, where I've got a few problems now with, like, I'm engaging people with all these amazing ideas and principles, but then there aren't really that many people around who know how to maintain or look after those, who aren't maybe a little bit too traditional or would want to take it in a different way. My favourite jobs are maybe the smaller urban gardens, where it's actually the clients who are going to be looking after that. It's much easier, and I've had great experience with two gardens especially, where I believe, like, the human and nature synergy comes from how you design the hard landscaping. Very simply, that was my original passion, I guess, the hard landscaping. I see that more as the canvas. That should be the passive but the permanent part of the design. That's the canvas that allows the rest of the planting to just go mental if you want it to. That gives you the legibility to it. It's not just if you wild up your garden and it just becomes a perceived mess. You can't go out into it. It feels like it's messy, feels like we've neglected it. But if you've got something designed that stays permanent, that could be a boulder, that could be a bit of paving, that could be something.
But that human-centric, landscaping material, so people can think, like, no, this is a design.
Legible.
And
then the rest of the
it's very
planting,
human, isn't it? Very human.
Yeah, I think people are drawn to that. They need some sort of a way to understand something across the board. I think that's generally the same.
Yeah.
It can look different, but it's generally the same. But then, I've just let these. I've done the initial planting design, but then I'll let self-seeders come in. I'll let it all go, and then I really love talking to the client about that. About, well, actually, this is yours to just steward, and they'll talk to me like really scared of, like, well, I don't want things to die. It's like, you go a long way to kill any of this. Like, it's stronger than you think it is. You can walk all over, do whatever you want. If it flops across the path, like, people say, is this all right to cut back now, Steve? It's like, well, what do you think? Is it in the way? And they're like, yeah, cut it back then.
Yeah.
Then I'll go back to these gardens, and then I'll talk to them, and they'll be really worried and just say, I'm not sure if we're doing this right.
The shoulders are up here, what am I doing?
And I walk out there, and it's fucking amazing.
Yeah.
I say, what's the... And it's like, no, I wasn't sure. Does it look good? It's like, yeah, you've nailed it then. And it's as simple as that.
But that's the process,
but it's
isn't it?
It's not that common, and there's opportunities in the small urban gardens. But going back to the public space, where you've got councils who are maybe going to be doing the brunt of the work, and the councils aren't trained in any of... It's not like it's even that much more complex, it's just a different system. And then, how we change that approach and the respect to maintenance people, the upgrading or the changing, evolving of a maintenance team to look after these spots in public spaces, that's what, we've learned.
And that's the thing.
Giving all of these ideas over to, like, and then we realise, well, if no one's maintaining it, that's the biggest challenge. Because if it goes to shit, that doesn't do the movement any good, and people just go back to what they were doing before.
And that's the thing in terms of, as I say, we have our own business that has maintenance as a part of it, and we're almost kind of doing ourselves out of business by promoting it. But the whole idea is about stewardship, and about the client or the community taking complete ownership of it, and then professionals just backing that up.
Yes.
And that, I think, is a part of that design flow. You know what I mean? So it's like, how can we create this that the client can engage in? It's like Steve talking about those kind of techniques that you have that balance in the garden already at play, and then it's down to them to get involved. And then how do you create this backup from the professionals to come in? Because you want to open up this whole world to the client or the community, and that be their own journey. You know what I mean?
So you were saying, John, about the design process, not just all about the garden, but you're designing in the maintenance management model as well.
Yeah, and I think that's it. It's not just about making pretty gardens and aesthetically pleasing spaces. It's nice and it helps people get engaged. But really, I think our duty, like, as we move forward with designing, is to create spaces.
I like the word duty. I like that.
Yeah, it's to create spaces that the clients or the community can have agency over that journey themselves, and to create a process that they can explore their own connections with the land, and eventually, start to design and evolve that design themselves.
And I think that's what people are really sort of clamouring for. They might not necessarily know that nature connection's what they're missing, but I think people definitely have this, we're working with Centre for Mental Health on this garden, and we fundamentally believe that there's the nature connection and mental health are linked, like quite clearly, and I've experienced that in my own life. It's like, but it's got to be a bit deeper than just walking through a park with some trees in it. There's got to be a much more of a deeper relationship that we've come from,
Yes.
now we've been completely disconnected from. But I think horticulture, generally, even though, it's done, it's kind of caught us and saved us, and we really reap the benefits of everything. That's such a lovely industry. But there's definitely, like, people are bypassing it, I think. Where's the roots from school, or how is it not even taught in school? This connection to, like, growing things, and it's like it's not really even an option. And I think, people get to a little bit later. That's why I think people gravitate to horticulture a bit later in their life, certainly as we've done. You'll often hear these stories. I used to be a musician, or I used to be an artist, and then they've found this creative sort of ability within this industry. But I think a lot of people, get more into, like, this idea of nature connection and bypass horticulture completely. And I think people can get into permaculture and land stewardship a bit easier, but it still becomes fringe then. It's not like the mainstream horticultural world.
I think the horticulture as well, like we've said this before, and we love horticulture. I mean, it has saved us, and it's an amazing journey you go on in that world. But it can feel certain words, like, I don't know, empirical, like there's almost like a colonial type kind of feel to it, elitist, where you're naming things in a certain way, and if you don't know those names, then you feel less of a person. Someone can walk in and say the Latin of a name, and suddenly they've got more power than someone who doesn't. And even the kind of common name, or the name that is known by the people of that area, might feel lesser than the Latin name.
But I've seen that. I mean, having taught at Capel Manor, at the end of the day, like, I used to teach, people that were doing apprenticeships with Basildon Council in the same class as, Q students. You can chuck all the Latin names all you want, but it's got to be more behind it as well, isn't there?
100%. There's nothing wrong with it, I think.
No.
You know what I mean? The Latin, how I see it is, you've got to have something more going on, and then that opens up the door. Once you are passionate, then you get into that. But this is
so
what
it's the
people
passion
are
behind I'm just going to label everything.
Yeah,
the passion,
like, that's interesting. And also the Latin names are pretty cool. Some of them, if you're into that, some of them are like based on mythology. And
there's a reason for it. It's a universal language. Like, it has its benefits.
Yeah.
But I think people, for whatever reason, and I'm not quite sure what it is, people are now living in a situation where they don't feel like this idea of being green-fingered, or they know how to garden, and I can't, everything that I plant dies.
Yeah.
It's something, maybe it's garden centres, but going to somewhere and there's this, like, commodity, like, or the human ego is just like, I like this plant, this is pretty, I'm going to put it in here, and I'm going to keep it on life support and keep it alive, and then eventually, it'll die, and it's probably in the wrong place, and it doesn't really want to be there. And then people have this perception, well, everything I try dies. And it's just what they have been given on this little selection in a garden centre. But where's that intrinsic sort of relationship with the land? And
this is what kind of brings on to my most favourite topic. That's an interesting one to kind of talk about. Is that sacred connection with the land in a modern context, right? And how do we create that connection? Because there it is, right? You label things, you name things. It's very academic, and very head stuff.
I'm interested. So I've got to pick up on that. You said about the sacred. When you say the word sacred, what do you mean by that?
Well, again, Steve and I are slightly different in our kind of terminology of that. I come from that background of kind of like journeying in the spiritual stuff, you know what I mean, and background in English literature and philosophy and stuff like that. Those terms for me, it comes from some kind of shamanic connection that's kind of lost these days, right? And funnily enough, like, again, I'll hark back to that Hampton Garden, but that there was a kind of an underlying kind of terminology that we spoke about in the brief, which is about how do we reconnect with the land that we are lucky enough to look after, and that stewarding process,
and that supports us.
Yeah, and big up Mary Reynolds, like who kind of really inspired me to kind of journey with that more. She was a great designer. She is a great designer, but she's over in Ireland now doing the Ark, which is like kind of rewilding on larger scales.
Yeah.
But she did a Chelsea garden, and it was back in 2000, and it was like the first kind of wild garden that was there.
And the archway, the
Exactly.
yeah,
back in the day. And she wrote a book called The Garden in Awakening, which had this kind of context about that, and it's about mythology and about imagination and about sacred space and genus loci and connecting with the land that's here authentically, but with these imaginative processes. And you know, as I say, I love mythology and I love fairies and elves and pixies and all this kind of stuff, right? But how do you put that in a modern context? And at Hampton we kind of spoke about that, but we were working with Japanese philosophy, because in Japanese philosophy there's kind of like architectural terms and things like that are very much to do with sacred ways of principles, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's Japanese, so it's acceptable. But if you do it in natively, it's just hippie, you know what I mean? It's banished. Like, and the idea of how do we put that into a modern context in a way that feels relevant? And I think there is a growing audience that are on that wavelength, that want to connect with the land in that way, but don't have the words for it. You know what I mean? And it's not about that hippie stuff. It's about doing it right, feeling authentic in the way you're doing it.
But people, it's just this labels, isn't it? You're a hippie, and therefore that's in the vernacular, and so we don't take that seriously because it's a bit woo-woo. But it's just it's.
So it just depletes everything. It's just like it just cuts everything off. So you suddenly you're in this world where it's like, all right, well if that's hippie and woo-woo, then I ain't got nothing. So I'm just kind of relating in this reality. You know what I mean? And what is the bloody reality? Who's saying what reality is? You know what I mean? And you know, we have these kind of talks, don't we, about what is that? What is reality?
So to link it sort of to what you guys are doing, what your guys are doing at Chelsea. So that deep, visceral reconnection by, you know, the kid. You know, we've seen hundreds of kids walking up to school this morning. You know, getting them to get that connection back to the land. Is that? I guess that's what you're saying.
Yes, and it's exploring those processes of how we can do that more and more, right? So things that I'm interested in that way is how do we create that true connection individually, first of all, with the land that we look after, and that just, I guess, exploring the seasons, exploring the rhythms, letting things go first and foremost. You know what I mean? Heart connection with that land in that way, where you watch, observe, relate, and learn to do things in a light touch. We always talk about light touch approach, but that light touch of what's the least I can do to let this land breathe and do its own thing and have those rhythms, but it still be practical for purpose. So it still can be something I can enjoy, but biodiversity, wildlife can enjoy. You can see things roll. I think that's a good starting point. Again, it kind of harks to that kind of Taoism and stuff like that, where you see nature change over time and you're with that rolling change rather than the staticness of controlling the situation. That's the fundamentals. But then it's like, you know, how do you develop that?
How do you resonate that with a modern context?
Yeah. And how do you kind of, you know, how do you do that with a community? And how do you kind of let everybody have their own kind of relationships with the land in public space? You know what I mean? For me, things like spirit of place is super important. You know, it's about genius loci, and we talk about spirit. When you go into a place and it's feeling the space, what creates that feeling?
The intangible, isn't it?
The intangible,
how you walk into a woodland, you might feel protected, you might feel cocooned, you might feel scared. What are these? When you go into a meadow, you feel free, you can breathe, or you might feel really exposed, like, you know, these are sort of the human experience, isn't it? Like an animal.
Exactly. Exactly. And it's that, you know, that's where it's all about the shamanicness of it all. Carl Jung, that kind of side of it, where it's like the archetypes. Yeah, so in that kind of the darker woodland, there'll be an archetype that represents that kind of feeling. And a meadow, you know, the lightness of that, there'll be a certain kind of archetype or symbol that does that, right? And it's how do you kind of have your own personal relationship with those archetypes of spirit in a place? And is there a way to actually design that? You know what I mean? Can you design with that kind of way of being and way of thinking? And obviously
the plants that you would use, and the emotive response to somebody's emotive response to a dandelion. You're talking about woodlands, emotive response to primrose or dogma.
It's the way you layer it, the way you tier it, the use of plants, the use of the existing space, the use of the industrial character of an area, and
then linking that to weeds as well.
Do you know what I mean?
Sorry, weeds. There we go. I'm saying.
Yeah, but you know, like all the urban ecology, let's say, you know what I mean, And there's so much there, and water and all the different elements of it all as well, and trying to create that kind of sense of the sacred in a modern way, and that's a journey that's, as I say, in the urban especially, it's so multicultural. You've got everyone coming together with their own versions of what that sacredness looks like. So again, it's kind of like designing this kind of feeling that takes into consideration everyone's own experience of what sacredness is. You know what I mean?
You know what? So this is great. I think it's now time that, we're getting into it now. Why don't we let's continue the podcast for part 2? We'll do it in the park.
Yeah, wicked.
Cool. Nice one, guys.
Yeah, nice one.
Yeah, love it. Yeah.
That's like 20 acres. Mountainous concrete.
Oh.
Like layering of graffiti, the planting and the ecology, recolonising this space.
I can just see those Sanguisorbias in the front there as well. Yeah.
And you think about the habitat layers and the biodiversity that's in this space, even in that wall. You know what I mean? Like all the layers that are going on in there. Was it Fergus Garrett who said that term, wild porosity?
Could have been.
That he kind of works with that Great Dixter, and we kind of take that into the urban context of this porosity that's in these kind of structures.
Yeah.
And even though they're hard, there's so many habitat layers on there, So it's it's just a very good bones backdrop to what we're doing. And there's already, like you say, there's already a wild feel here. Apparently back in the 90s they had this was a conservation garden they got some funding from the lottery for. You can see the kind of rotting.
Shall we have a look in?
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of inspiration that's already there, and it's just pulling out the best of it and working with these like innovative techniques that we've been talking about. And obviously with O'Donovan's Waste right next door, the ability to bring the crush from there. And
so there's this hyper local material as well.
Hyper-local material, hyper-local community engagement. It's all very close.
Yeah.
So we've got a lot of this open aspect, which is predominantly grassy meadow, but this is this idea of keeping everything on site. We've got local waste literally next door, stripping out all of this topsoil then to be used in a food forest grading to the back. So then we can fill this full with more resilient substrate design, get all this in immersive meadow, have a lighter touch, maybe break out some of this, moving into, there's going to be a reflection pool repurposed from the garden, possibly mushroom den. So that really celebrating that urban growing, all that movement, so engaging a new audience. So the big challenge for this will be, it's more exciting than even the might of sort of Chelsea and the grandeur of Chelsea, is like, how do we legitimately create a space that's community led, that's a success, and doesn't just get forgotten about like many of these community gardens do. And I think that's what's so lovely about stuff like this. Like, this place has had many different lives, it was repurposed as a pig pen. When was that?
During the war, and all these little holes in it you can see here, those were the little foundation points for the pig pens to go in. It used to feed the local community during that time.
And then after that it became a pocket park, and there's like black and white pictures of the community. There's like climbing frames in here. So it's like, it's got all of this basically setting that kind of base, which is the concrete walls. It can then be reimagined in loads and loads of different ways, ultimately with this kind of our vision of this nature-centred community hub where people can grow their own food, get together, be on their own. It's just kind of celebrating what's already happening here, but having our sort of sense of stewardship of it. That was the other thing. Is that, like, these community spaces, quite often it's budget lead.
Yes, yeah.
So quite often it's timber, it's painted timber.
Yeah.
Couple years, it's fucked.
Yeah.
Whereas like this is like the structural elements of this.
There, isn't it?
That's I mean, you know, the
same old. Yeah.
But this, you know, is there, it's permanent. And I think that we're celebrating a lot of this idea in our design for Chelsea, in that a lot of the things we're designing are repurposed concrete, steel, things that are just going to last for God knows how long. It's not just going to go into disrepair in a couple of years and then no one's interested, no one's engaged. It's just taking this inspiration from these sort of textures and tones and this structure. That's our vision for it.
Nice.
But yeah, so all this area, the open part of it's going to really work well with that kind of crush aspect, right? And that'll create that really nice kind of... We'll keep all the pathways pretty much the same, and then we'll just have these nice, big, long kind of walkways through there, and we'll have some seating running through it, and then we can really go to town with the crush aspects and work out some mounding and
So technically speaking, you're putting back in elements of the garden rather than you're just taking the Chelsea garden and planting it here.
Yeah, because it's much bigger, this space.
Yeah.
So it's
I mean, we're kind of
repurposed.
defined by the perimeters of this space, and we've got bigger ambitions for even like there's bits down there, the filter beds go on, and the skate park arrived at one point. Like this is a much bigger area.
We're going to use this as like a poster child to show what we've done.
Yeah.
Centre for Mental Health are going to do an impact report on the before and after of the local community's mental health for it. Going to do the same with an ecology report as well.
What baseline surveys now and
And
So
then,
essentially, we create that blueprint of like affordability, the impact on social community health, the impact to ecology. So then we can prove that evidence-based proof that this works for this money, and we can roll that out many spaces like this nationwide.
another thing with this as well is that the big challenge here is antisocial behaviour, and how we can design into that again. So it's that kind of, we've had a few conversations about that here with certain people, certain stakeholders who are like, you want to put this lovely garden in here where there's all this antisocial behaviour. It's like that whole chicken and egg thing where it's like, yeah, you kind of want to, and then it'll attract other people. And to be fair, like, we still want those people to come here as well, because this is an important place for them.
But that's like a wider debate, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like the mentality of certain people, like there's antisocial behaviour. Yeah, okay. So what's underlying all that antisocial behaviour?
Exactly.
Mental health.
100%. And potentially this, even as it stands, is probably one of the places the only place they get their nature connection from right now. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's still important that they come, but it's just making sure that they can come and everybody else can come, because at the moment there's certain people come here after dark and it's just like off limits.
Yeah.
So it's
And the fact
designing
it's
a
like it's
space.
fenced off.
Yeah.
It feels like you come in here, you can't get out easy. It's like all this kind of like, it's like a pen.
Yeah.
As we're talking about taking all that fencing down, just letting this feel much freer, much more open.
Yeah.
People come in and out.
And again, that's the kind of thing with that kind of design of planting, you know, with the crush and the resilient meadow schemes and the food forestry, is it's proper thick layers.
Yeah.
And it can take a walk on, and it could take a few people having to climb over stuff. And
Someone graphing up one of these walls.
we want them to continue graphing them up,
That's
you
the
know?
point.
But it comes back to what you were saying earlier about, you know, kind of gardens being kind of elitist and people not feeling welcome.
Yeah.
You know, like, I feel pretty welcome at certain places, but people may not want to go to a National Trust garden. People may not want to go to Chelsea. You know, just like, well,
Yeah.
that's
That's not
just
me. It's not who I am.
No, yeah.
Yeah.
Can I use this garden? You
Yeah.
know, it's
That's it.
a big issue, really.
Big time. And it's opening up that accessibility to everybody, isn't it? And finding that middle way, isn't it? So that everyone feels welcome in all these places together, rather than it being a separatist thing. You know what I mean? That's the thing we face, isn't it, with public space at the moment, I think.
But this is the problem, because it's hard to get that across to people, because if you're not part of that element of society that is demonised or is labelled, it's hard to get into that mindset. Do you know what I mean? Like, it is. I come from Cambridge.
Yeah.
I know exactly where I come from and the connotations around that. I don't feel excluded from a lot of places. But again, it comes back to inclusion. I mean, these are all buzzwords, but, you know, again, why you've got that antisocial behaviour, why people might want to smash up a garden or do whatever, you know, because it's just like, well, this has nothing to do with me.
Yeah.
And I think this is getting to the wider point, or the wider point I keep coming back to in my head is like the days of no disrespect to Tom Stewart Smith, but the days of massive gardens at Chatsworth or these public realm projects that are public, but they're not, they're on private land. I don't know, that kind of leaves me, personally, as an individual and as a design professional, leaves me a bit cold.
Yeah.
Like,
who
who are they appealing to?
Yeah, I mean, I personally, my mum always takes the piss out of me for it. That like I just don't resonate with like these estates or these National Trust gardens. I've never had an intrinsic draw to them. I find it quite. There's more exciting stuff happening now, and you do get this more naturalistic approach, which is interesting. You get to see all these, really great designers and plants people having a go in these spots. And it's happening more and more. So a lot of this is leaching into all sorts of different. But I guess my background is really resonating with these spaces. And then the more I've thought about it, more I was engaged with horticulture and planting, I then start to think, well, how can we reimagine this? And like, this is accessible to everyone. It's on your doorstep.
Yeah.
And like, this is just here anyway. There is something we always had this conflict about of like, we walk through here and you see a guy, blazing up round a corner. Or you see someone just hanging out in here. And then we're proposing this scheme where, we're going to get more people in here, and are you alienating the people who actually use it? And it's this conflict of like, is this just cool how it is? What's our place of like trying to, I think that's what we're trying to be sensitive to. Like, there's a vibe in here that we don't want to get rid of.
Yes.
That's part of the challenge as well.
Well, that's that light touch design approach, isn't it? And I think that's the thing. What you're talking about there with the estates and the high level designers, it's almost the conversation we've been having from day one. Who are we? What? I don't feel like a garden designer. You know what I mean? Like the connotations of what a garden designer is in this day and age, it doesn't feel right. You know what I mean? In terms of like, it's almost a cliche of what a garden designer is these days, swanning in and like creating this thing and then
just disappearing,
and it just being something that appeals to that eliteness,
Gardens Illustrated,
the Gardens Illustrated world, and there's a dustiness associated with that as well. You know what I mean? There's a certain kind of a chino wearing kind of landscape architect wading through. And
it's maybe not engaging the audience we want to reach out to as well. Those people we were talking about earlier who don't really know what it is that they're after or want that connection.
Yeah. It's that kind of thing of, like we're saying, with that light touchness approach that we're talking about, to the point where it's almost like this is cooler than anything we could actually propose. It's almost like not being a designer at all is actually like the way forward, and it's kind of understanding that balance, isn't it, really? And also, I guess, from our own experience and journeys with it, we're able to show something more than what people have already got in their heads. So that's something we see, isn't it? And another project we're working on at the moment, they've had an idea about breaking out the concrete, and they've had an ecologist come along and say, oh, that's not very good for habitat. But in our experiences, we're saying, well, how, where's that ecologist coming from, his background? Because there's a completely other thing going on.
Yeah.
So it's like, have you seen this project, or have you seen that? And creating this kind of mood board processes and things like that open up the idea. And maybe that, again, it's kind of directing it in a way that you open up an initial idea with that hub to create this kind of like this joint collab.
I think that's what I find most exciting of being a designer, I guess, if we're going to have that label, is that, you bring
You're uncomfortable with that label as well?
I think I'm more comfortable with it than John. Like, so I guess I've been through like this design training, and like I wrestled with it. I was an artist, and the big question is, what's the difference between art and design? Yeah. And like that question always, it's like, being a designer doesn't feel as cool to me. I'm all right with it now. As I see exactly what you're talking about, is I really get a kick out of, because I'm really interested in this, and you apply it to any design. Right, it's not just garden design, but you get to show people all of the way you see things. You get to show people all the stuff you're excited about, and you go to these talks and you start seeing the world in a very different way. And I get a real kick out of showing people how you can reinterpret a garden. I could be a designer in it. I could apply this to any sort of branch of design. But I find it really exciting, and certainly what my background was in, and looking at these things critically and differently, observing spaces. I think that's why, and that's, I think we both get a kick out of like showing people the way we see it.
There's no doubt, like the passion. We're both very passionate people. And if you're able to express your passion and be like, okay, this is this, and
you bring
get them
people
engaged,
and you bring people with you.
you bring people all together to do something really cool, and that's at the heart of it. It's got to be heart, isn't it? It's just got to be heart and together, community.
Cool. So what you were saying as well about it's a collaboration, because I sometimes feel like we're kind of all can be working in isolation, and we've only got so much energy and knowledge base to get so far. So I think the real joy is working with other people, vibing off people's energy.
Definitely.
What makes them tick?
Yeah.
Like
That was a fundamental to us meeting, and that was certainly a journey I went on. Of like, I used to think, even when I finished, and became a designer, like there's the ego that's like, and I used to kind of feel like collaboration more meant like compromise, and like I had to compromise my ideas because someone else wanted to do something differently.
Yeah.
Then I met John, and like this journey we've been on has been all about creating this collaborative team, and that I personally experienced, and I'm sure John has as well, that like what we've done together is way beyond anything we'd have done individually, or even have the sort of the scope to see that, because we've educated each other as well.
And this is like the support,
the hand-holding,
emotional support.
Yeah,
because it's bloody hard when you're on your own as a designer. And we say this like, and we work with designers with Golden World a lot as well. It's that kind of thing of like lonely hearts. Like you've got a lot of people just working on their own. They've got no one to share their thoughts with, and the kind of the whole process.
there is no process. Do you not think like there is no? They're kind of working on their own. They've got to get a design out to make some sort of money. There's no sort of like, how's this design? What could we do? What couldn't we do? Could we turn that around at 45 degrees to open up the space? Yeah. And you're not attached to any ecologist or anything like that. Like just to give that little bit of extra input. Just to really take up that design. Bring the design up by 25%.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And also like that reason why we had that little launch recently, and bringing that kind of collective together. Yeah. I think like a part of the whole rebranding we're trying to do as well is to get away from that idea of like the designer being the one. Do you know what I mean? And everything falls from that. Yeah. You know what I mean? There is that kind of feeling, isn't there? You know what I mean? And like the gardeners just being as important, you know what I mean, or more important, because they're the ones who've got that knowledge in the ground. The ecologists, the local community workers. All of that side of it is like super important. You know what I mean? Everyone's standing together on the same level. Yeah, too right. That's what it should be about. You know what I mean? And then certain people do need to take lead in a certain way, where it's like to get the job done. There needs to be that
different skill sets, isn't it?
That's personality. That's personality type. Some people are going to be like, sorry, can you take the lead? Because I'm a bit of an introvert. But
but there's still, it's still equal footing. You know what I mean? That introvert will be bringing something to the table that the extrovert can't. You know what I mean? And that's the yin and yang of it all, isn't it? It's that balance process.
I'm thinking about James McGill at the old ecologist at John's place.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
Yeah. He's not going to stand up in front of 100 people, is he?
But he'll bring you that piece of wisdom that you do not know. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He'll bring something to the table which you'll be like, oh my gosh, that has just changed my life. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's what it's at.
That then spreads out, and then people who are good at that can spread the word of it. Like, it's just opening up for everyone to collaborate on different things, and that's what's super important, and the most exciting thing, because then you just get loads of different heads working on different projects. And
too right. So then, okay. So we're sort of standing here, Wild City, new brand. Like, where do you kind of see 2, 5, 10 years down the line? Because this is the start of a movement. Where do you kind of see this kind of going?
That's an interesting question, and I've always been.
Sorry to interrupt, because after about 2 seconds of reading the blurb, obviously there's a bit of a connection. Because I know Alexis and all the rest of it, so there's a bit of a connection. But as soon as I read the blurb on the Wild City website, I was like, I need to just need to be involved in this. Yeah. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, other people are thinking of feeling like I do. I'm just.
It's funny, I had a landscape architect just qualified call yesterday and say, I've been got on the internet looking at places to join. I can't see anything. It's all so corporate and dusty. He said, but then I found you guys, And with our point of view, we're quite, it's quite small and like humble what we're doing, but then we're being found like in this kind of way, and it resonating with this new crowd. It's like, I really want to be a part of this, and it's like, that's wicked, and that's what we kind of set out to do. And as far as where we were, like when we first met, we had this longer vision of where we want to take this thing. And again, this is our side of things. Everyone's got their own side of a movement together, but we do have this quite fun kind of balance of me being a bit of a driver with it and a bit of a kind of the visionary, let's say, of like, I do see these bigger visions of where this could go. And Steve brings his more maybe introvertness of the kind of the details and how do we actually get that done.
Yeah.
So there's a nice balance of that, isn't there?
Yeah, it's the optimism and realism, and I think I described to you earlier, like the optimist and the pessimist. And each one, it's the yin yang thing.
Yeah.
Each one brings the other one down.
Yeah, exactly. he does, But I also get it past the next level. I take it. It doesn't just have to be there. We can take it there.
Yeah.
And so, from my point of view, like what we've kind of gone with this is like the bigger picture is future cities. You know what I mean? And what does future cities look like in the real?
Yeah.
Not just this whole thing of glass and big kind of planting schemes and green walls, and that's how do we actually create something, our version of that, as a part of the pie of how you have connection with the earth, like we talked about, the sacredness of it, the hands in the mud,
and in the existing city. It's not easy, but it's an easy sort of. You can imagine these future cities that are have all, but they don't exist yet. There's these existing cities and frameworks that have a beauty to them and a rich heritage that I think it's a shame to ignore that. That's a massive part of our history, and we just need to realign a bit, and that creates the most exciting results. I think it's like, how can we look at cities as this canvas, rather than like, it's all grey and boring. It's like, well, it's just a canvas is boring unless there's something in front of it or on it.
But for us, Wild City is about that. It's public space and it's residential. So it's that kind of thing of like larger scale stuff. How does it actually work? Authentically, how do you create authentic nature connection in urban environments? What are the tools you're using to create that? How are you going to look after it in the long term? You know what I mean? And as this thing grows, it's about taking on projects like this as kind of ideas and experiments in that.
So I wanted to ask, I mean, do you guys get more turned on by, for want of a better phrase, public realm, so you can impact more?
I think the thing for me as a designer, probably before I met John or just on the journey with John, is as a garden designer, you're really only limited to people who have the money to go through certainly a design process with a designer, never mind the actual cost to install it. And I was at this conflict where I was really on this ecological mission, and like I wanted to give people this nature connection. So, but the only people I'm doing this for are people with massive money.
And you're only kind of impacting the couple,
just them,
them.
So it seemed to me like when I finished my design course, public space was what I wanted to do because it meant everyone could enjoy it. That was before I met John. I knew like public spaces, and I was inspired by more landscape architecture. It seemed like that was much more forward thinking than garden design. Even the visuals, that was my thing. I taught myself Photoshop, the visuals, the engaging people with those visuals. Landscape architecture was much more ahead of the game than things that in pencil crayon and still doing things by hand. So like that to me was easily where I wanted to go, and then met John, and this public space was like, this is how you make the biggest impact and make the biggest change for people who haven't got the money to do it, don't have the access to it, can't go out to nature. They're stuck here.
But it's the real challenge, both getting the money to do the projects and also us making ends meet. You know what I mean? Because the domestic is where you can make your money. And it's almost like that. Like you say, you're making lovely gardens for lovely people, and that's great. But the real challenge we face is to try and create like bigger change now, and to make it really happen. And so that's where we're at.
I think we're emerging. We're emerging into this. We've been on this journey with it, and I guess we are still figuring out what this fully looks like. But like the focus is, genuine nature connection in the urban landscape. How possible is that? and how do we engage people to see things, you know, the way we are, the way other people are seeing it? How do we engage the community?
And how do we make it low maintenance? How do we make it affordable? How do we design the aftercare? How do we create sacred connection with land in the urban environment? Like big challenge questions.
But what does it look like when you were just saying there, thinking back to the Beth Chatto Symposium about public prescribing and how these things have to knit together. So, yeah, we don't know what it, sacred nature connection in cities looks like at the moment. But again, we can take, the NHS and what that might look like, and getting people with mental health conditions going through the sort of, how can I put this, going through the hospital system and getting them out in that community and getting them into these gardens that you guys will be doing and other people will be doing. It's a new frontier basically, isn't it?
It is. And that's it. It's that kind of thing of just everyone having a go, isn't it? And somehow it'll unfold. And that's the good thing about urban world, is that it has always been that way. Isn't it? Things have always kind of been happening at the same time and built something more diverse than any one person could have a vision of. That's the thing. When you see visions of future cities, what they look like is this kind of like some kind of Star Wars type setting of a city. All clean but no, the reality of it is it will just be a layered kind of tapestry, like a planting community.
Exactly like this is, no one planned for this to have this kind of life, but it evolves. Landscapes don't stay static. That's the whole point.
And that's what gives it soul, isn't it? You know what I mean? And depth and groundedness. And yes, there'll be a place for the green walls and the kind of the greenwashing kind of moments. You know what I mean? But then there's also like the back street. How do you work out the bit that's next to the council estate that they haven't got no money for and they need something that really is important to them?
I'm more excited by that.
That's the real fun.
Yeah, because every time I see a green wall, I'm like, yeah, it's lovely, but what's behind the green wall? Dirty, great big black plastic, and just.
And also, that's already being done, and that's fine. You know what I mean? There's a lot of people who can take care of that now. You know what I mean? And but there's this other side of it that I think we're all a part of, isn't it? This kind of this wavelength we've spoken about, who are interested in that. The innovations that can make it, all those things we said. You know what I mean, like, and how it can. There's all that, the wealthy points in the city and all that. They're already taken care of. We've got the designers who can do that. But then you've got all this landscape around here that's just turf, or do you know what I mean? How do we make that engaging for the people that really need a bit of connection?
And I think that kind of the vibe of. Although it's definitely matured since then, the kind of vibe of guerrilla gardening, where the kind of people are just. I see it on Instagram all the time, and I am in my own bit of echo chamber, but it's happening. Like people are just fed up of being surrounded by poor green spaces, and they're just doing it. They're getting out there. They are, they're planting up a border which would have 5 landscaping shrubs. They're ripping that out, and they're putting in, meadows. They're putting in, more diverse planting schemes. People are just there is that hunger,
and I think that's the way it has to be moving forward. Is the community volunteering is going to be a major part of it, right? Because how do you keep them engaged, not just for tomorrow? So with the guerrilla garden is a perfect example, right? You can throw some seeds down, you can get a good vibe. Hey, I've done it. Then you fucked off, and you're never coming back to see it.
Yeah.
And it's going to look completely shit. And so it's how can you get that guerrilla gardening revolution into something that actually makes an impact properly. You know what I mean?
How do you? Because again, it's this classic thing about funding mechanisms, isn't it? So funding mechanisms to pay for somebody to oversee it.
Well, again, like we spoke about that thing with what is the designer's role?
Yeah.
And I guess that is it, right? It's to be able to design it in that way that things like guerrilla gardening and community volunteering can work long term.
It's the way it's designed, I guess, that what we were saying before, the lower budgets, the material choices, that ultimately leads to it sort of going down the pan a little bit. As designers, can we think of new ways to do that so things have a sense of permanence? Some things have the sense of permanence, some things have this sense of transience. There's also the collaboration. I guess this is where we're working with, I think, people like Project Giving Back. the collaboration is these people with money are funding all of this stuff. So it's like that's a part of the collaboration as well. People who have that ability to then believe in the vision as well. And then you know, it and I guess that's us as designers. There's linchpin, the people who can show the vision, describe the vision, engage people, and then the rest is like an orbit, I guess, around that.
And there is definitely like, you know, a lot of brands and things like that who have that kind of corporate social responsibilities. We have people shouting us out saying, we've got 10 grand we want to put into a garden. You know? It's like, there is more and more of that happening. And again, raising, like fundraising, you know, we're working with East London Thames Waterworks, right? Like the way they've raised the money to buy the land for that is amazing. You know what I mean? There's more opportunities of that happening. And again, that's a part of the collab as well. Like fundraisers, like people who can bring the money in to make these things reality.
Yeah, and people are actually creating writing the application forms and the terminology.
That's a skill. That's a massive skill.
Yeah.
You know. So getting the funding, and then using that funding well, that's a whole design process, isn't it?
It's the long term. That's everything for it's long term establishment, long term success. See, quite often in Bristol, there's little community projects, and then they just sort of dissipate. The community's engaged for the day. It's brilliant. Then it just doesn't have the long-term effect, and I think there's lots of reasons for that.
So then, how can we break that cycle? How do you? How?
There's a certain need for a resilience in the design that, like we were talking about. So if you create the bones to hold the space, then the planting can just become itself. You know what I mean? Like you set the scene, and then what you want is the resilience to do its own thing. So and that takes change of perspective, because if you can engage people to say, don't worry if it's looking wilder and wilder, like we were talking about earlier, it doesn't need to look aesthetically pleasing like all year round. You know, like with Dunnett's approach of like making sure there's 3 colours popping at the same time for a year, so people are always looking at it. If people look at a space and think, all right, the bones are all strong and they're held together, the planting's just doing its thing, then there can be times where it just leans off, you know, like, and there's not that much engagement from people, but the scheme's still there, and potentially through that there's succession of its own.
Yeah, and there's a perception as well, the perception of what's happening there. You know, it's a simplistic way of looking at something where it's like, it doesn't look pretty now. What does that mean? I think that's the legibility of the design, where you can have that juxtaposition of it looking wild and messy, and it might look a bit crap in your garden if it was like that, but if things are designed sensitively with the other stuff, there's a beauty to that. I think that's a fundamental for us. It's like this change of perception of what's beautiful. If you understand what's going on there, it's way deeper than something just being very pretty on that day.
So, and then I guess from technically speaking, again, if you're working with more mineral soil substrates, then sort of the growth rate is naturally slower. So again,
substrate design is everything.
And it makes it mature slowly rather than like, let's put loads of fertility into the soil and then
you get more going on in it. You know, more diversity in it.
Exactly, and all the wildlife layers included.
And eventually that might, you know, grow into something that is more. You know, the fertility will probably rise, and depending on the site, you know, but that.
I mean, that's
things change, things move, things evolve, and stewarding that, editing that, that's quite exciting I think for a community. If people understand what's happening.
That's why I've always been inspired by motorway verges, you know, because they're things that do their own thing. And that's, you know, the ultimate, I think, for us would be to be in a situation where we've designed a landscape that's practical for purpose, and the rest of it's just doing what motorway verges do. And then the community can just kind of come and do a little bit and bob here and there, and they don't have to feel like they have to do the work. There's a difference with that.
There's a real, I mean, there is this natural relaxation and kind of what is perceived as a garden. You know, that kind of. I'm laughing because I'm always looking at motorway verges. I'm loving it because you know, you get your north, your south aspect.
Exactly.
And I was in Suffolk this week, and on the row verges is basically not sand, but really free draining. There's all these verbascums, you know, the rosettes of the verbascums on the side. I was loving it, and it is that, it's recalibrating what we see as a garden.
Exactly, and like we were saying at the beginning, there's different context for different things. So this won't work everywhere. You know what I mean? That idea.
I want it to, though.
And there's enough space for it.
The thing is the way it looks, though. Like the principles are the same, and they can be put in any different context. And that, you know, this space is this, so it totally suits this.
Because I guess in a way, you know, you talk about the legibility of a design. Even if you go back 20, 30 years, where Peter Oldorf was using the big, U columns, which stood throughout the year to give the fluff. And
that's exactly it. Tom Stewart-Smith does it. It's like the permanence of the box ball or the Taxus or a boulder. They're all using the same design technique. That, you know, it's a plant, but that throughout the seasons in winter, all of the rest of the perennials die back, but that has that structural volume to it.
But then this is the vibe. This is the
and that's the thing. We often put boulder. I've often. If I can, I'm putting a boulder in a garden design.
Yeah.
But, you know, we're in the urban, so, like, here's the boulders here. The waste facility next door is full of boulders. They're all concrete ones. So it's like this change of perception of like everything, you know, all of this is natural. You know, these terms as well, we get bogged down in these terms of, suddenly we're talking about nature and we're saying we are nature. Like, the terminology doesn't exist to describe this.
That's the problem. It's humans trying to describe the indescribable. We're trying to use words to describe something deeply more emotional and beyond words, really, I think.
Definitely. Yeah. And it's that thing of, like, the humanness needs to happen, though, doesn't it? You know what I mean? That quality of what do we like to do? We like to create. You know what I mean? We need to imprint on the land. There's a certain kind of desire to do that, right?
Yeah.
And it's how can we do that well in line with ecology, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you know, historically we haven't.
But and this is the thing, it's going hand in hand. Like, this is the biodiversity podcast, but we haven't really talked about. It's all good. We haven't really talked about biodiversity, but inherent in this movement is, well, it's front and centre. Biodiversity.
100%.
The sheer abundance of different things, how our people might view those different things, and how that affects their emotional state and how they feel in a space.
Yeah.
You know, it feels a deeper space. It's not just 400 landscaping shrubs and an Amelanchier or whatever.
Exactly. And that's the kind of thing we were talking about with this idea of real impact on mental health in a space like this. And what does it take to make you actually feel good? Or feel, it's not even good, is it? It's just feel. You know what I mean? Feel connected to a space. And it's things like that. It's like, you don't necessarily see that it's full of biodiversity, but you unconsciously know it's there.
Well, I think,
you know what I mean? That's the difference, isn't it? You know what I mean?
That's the engagement with people as well. As, like, we talk a lot about greening things up, ecology, and, like, nature, and making things nature-centred. But if we're not in the picture as well, it's all for nothing, really. And then it's engaging people in that. And I think the mental health aspect, you can argue, you know, many people argue about ecology, what's good for it, what's bad for it, what's going on in the rest of the world. But the thing I think you can't argue and people really resonate with is the fact that it has a massive effect on your mental health. And that just as a something to engage people with is more tangible for them than saying, well, this is great for bees or this is great for birds. That's great, that's vital.
Yeah.
But it's selfish humans we are quite a lot of the time. If we see how it impacts us and our life and how it will have a benefit to us, then that massively, like, engage people straight away. And educating people on what that's about.
It's fully moved on from, like, smelling a bit of lavender in a sensory garden, isn't it? And it's how deep you take it, isn't it? How deep are we going here? But, you know, I think George Monbiot said something about ecological boredom in the urban landscape, and that's it, isn't it? It's about that depth of ecology in our lives in the urban environment. So there's two sides of that. There's, first of all, to show people that it actually is pretty diverse and there's actually things thriving all around us in the pockets and the gaps. There's a lot of urban ecology. Look around us now, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's dense with it. So people being aware that that's already there, and then that light touch approach can come along from that.
And you know, as you were talking earlier, before you talked about George Monbiot, about rewilding and how I just see more and more and more that when people talk about rewilding, it takes about 2 seconds to say, somebody says, oh yeah, it's about rewilding ourselves, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's kind of, we become that detached. But I think the rewilding movement has opened people up more to the less manicured. It's kind of, again, this is kind of this like the continuum of, you know, manicured to naturalistic to, yeah, let's go really wild, you know, and that's all good.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah, that's it. It's how far you can take it, isn't it? It's kind of like that, like you say, how far are you willing to rewild yourself? How far are you willing to rewild the land around you? You know?
Yeah, big time.
That kind of thing. Was that another one that we love using? Is that healing of the land, healing of the human spirit is the same process.
Yeah, too.
That's all we're going on, isn't it? It's that journey together.
Which I think comes back to the mental health. You know, like a lot of mental health issues around it, and we can't really. A lot of people can't describe why they aren't feeling great, or they are feeling down, or they can't articulate why they're just a little bit depressed and a little bit like, oh my God, I'm a bit anxious. You know, and I think it's
modern life, and it's
just
a
deeper connection that we really just don't live how we're built to.
No, there we go. That's moving it on.
We live in just very sterile, quite often solitary existences. Not really getting outside in offices or at home. Even more so, everyone's working from home. You're not even going out to an office now.
Yeah.
That can't not have an impact on your well-being, like, and what we've come from and how we're supposed to be physical all the time. And,
yeah.
But that relates to like what's happening right now, which is that deep hunger to connect. Like that's the response, isn't it, to where we're at? Yeah. And you can see that everywhere. And that's where we're talking about that thing of like people bypassing horticulture to get into that nature connection.
Yeah.
And it's everywhere, isn't it? Everywhere is about that now. And it's just about designing that together a new way, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%.
Lads, I think we could talk the back legs of a donkey, but I think we should wrap up there.
Yeah, nice one.
Wicked.
Thank you so much, mate. Wicked.
Nice one.
Wicked.